Well, I was a radio operator gunner on a B-17 in 8th Air Force in England. I enlisted initially to go into pilot training. There was initially something in the order of 350 of us who were also in pilot training. We took some basic training. And at the close of this, there was a decision made that they, at that point in war, they only needed about 50 of these 350. And the rest of us went to other things, whatever it was. And I happened to go to radio operator school. There were several opportunities for other things as well, but I had the capability of doing so, and I thought this might work out. Well, first of all, I was in college at the time I went into the service. I had been away to college for just about a little over 2.5 years, about 2 years and 9 months, as a matter of fact. So being away from, quote, my personal home was not a big difference, other than the fact that I'm now all of a sudden in uniform rather than in school. Well, they were not particularly opposed to it. First of all, I'm a member of a large family. I had 5 brothers and 3 sisters. There were 5 of us boys out of the 6 that were in service during World War II at the same time. So at the time I enlisted, I already had 3 brothers in the service. So my mother, I guess, and family were kind of accustomed to the boys being on their own. Having had 3 brothers in the service, 2 of whom had left with the National Guard before we were actually entered into the war, it was not particularly a new ground for me. I had some familiarity as a result of visiting and talking with my brothers. I was at Keesler Field in Mississippi, and you got tossed in largely with persons who were out of college as well. The individuals who made up the component that I was in, the first 220 squadron that I was in, were from Tennessee, from University of Tennessee, University of Alabama, University of Mississippi, and the like. So mostly individuals from colleges throughout the Southeast that came into service just as I did, who had not yet completed their education. I was in college, and I recall vividly, in fact, the vice president of the college making the announcement just at noon on Sunday about the bombing that occurred. Individuals at the school in general were a little baffled, among other things. Well, having been, this was the cadets now, who probably have as tough a training as most anyone. So I was in Biloxi, Mississippi, and it's a little bit warm down that way. And so we were up early and stayed late. I went from there to Knoxville, Tennessee, to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville with other cadet candidates, and we were in training there as well. We did, in fact, among other things, have some flight training, but at the completion of that, then we went to classification center, and that's when we were dispersed to whatever. Went to Scottsfield, Illinois, to radio operator school for 3 or 4 months, and from there out to Yuma, Arizona, in the desert for gunnery training, flight training. Then eventually we crewed up with other crews. Now these are single. We then crewed up with other individuals having gone to Lincoln, Nebraska to do so, and went out to South Dakota for flight training before going overseas. After you complete your flight training, you were assigned We just knew that we were going overseas. We were not certain whether it was going to be to England or to Italy, because both of whom used B-17s, and we trained in B-17s. So we were pretty certain that we'd go to one or the other. Arrived in the fall of the year. So it was cooling down. It was not bitterly cold otherwise in England, but it was cool. And you were full of anticipation to know where you were going to go and what you were going to do specifically. But then they took all new crews and assigned an individual who had already been flying missions over there, and we did some training there to get accustomed to what it was like to get in and out of there. So we did several training missions in England itself before we began to fly our combat missions. Being new, I was a radio operator gunner, and we most often in B-17s, first of all, the 8th Air Force was comprised of 3 major divisions: 1st Division, 2nd Division, and 3rd Division. I was in the first, or we were in the 1st Division. The 2nd Division was comprised of B-24s. The 1st and 3rd Division were all B-17s. So we flew, B-17s could achieve just a little higher altitude than could the B-24s. So we generally flew some missions that they were not able or did not go because it was more dangerous, if you will, to fly at lower altitude than at high. So we usually took on those. But there's always been a little debate about that, of course, but we know the difference. I remember on the first mission that I flew, first of all, you got up in the early morning, anywhere from 2 to 5 o'clock most often. And you went from there to chow hall, you went from there down to the flight line where you gathered your gear, and secondly, you had a briefing. There was a general crew briefing, and then there were separate briefings for the pilots, navigator, and radio operator in separate. And you were able to get your codes that were used for the day, because codes were changed every 6 hours, that you were used to send messages and otherwise, and whatever. You went down to the flight line and boarded your aircraft at whatever time, depending on what the weather was like over Europe. Sometimes you sat on the sideline for a good long while in a crew's tent down there, waiting until you got clearance to take off. But on our first mission, as we were forming, because you did fly up to anywhere from 10 to 20,000 feet in the air and circled to form up with your group to head out overseas. There was 2 planes that collided and went spinning down in a spiral of fire. And I thought to myself, my gosh, am I going to get killed before I get across the water the first time? So, yeah, the first mission I remember vividly. We had been real fortunate for the most part, although we did get clobbered meaning lots and lots of flak. Sometimes there were generally about 3 types of flak that you would see. Some was a big burst of gray, white-like flak. Other was what we named as halo flak, because when the burst occurred, there was a perfect ring of smoke, black smoke around it, that you could see, well, of course, yards, obviously. And the third was just a little more mild kind of flak. So there were 2 or 3 different sort of flak. And when you were able to see it above you and below you, you felt reasonably good because it wasn't bouncing off your aircraft. But you knew the third time that flak was going to come zero in on you, because the gunners on the ground were getting that range of those planes. And they were shooting up here, they were shooting down here and here. Now the radio operator had, among other things, had the obligation to throw out chaff. And I know that probably doesn't have much meaning to many people. But chaff was thin strips of tinfoil. It was bundled. And I had a chute right by my radio room that I could shove that in and go out. And when it did so, it sprinkled all over the air like so, and messed up the radar of the German guns on the floor, on the ground. So yeah, when we got into it, I was tossing out a lot of chaff, and glad to have it. There were several occasions when things got real tough. On one occasion, we thought we were going to have, we essentially lost 2 engines on off the target, coming off a target, and we began to toss out gear because we didn't know whether we were going to be able to make it back to across to England or not, across the channel. And we tossed out a lot of the gear that we had in the plane to make it lighter. So we landed in England at the end of the runway. Thank God the engines had held, but we lost another engine and we could not taxi, so they had to come out and pull us in. And so there were a couple of occasions when we had incidents of this sort. In addition to that, now, after flying a regular tour of missions, I did fly with other crews, because when our crew was stood down, there were crews that had members of their crew that had been wounded or killed and were not able to get up. So what they did was to pick up persons to fit that bill from other crews that were not flying that day. And I flew with, my crew was Jordan. Now, Jordan was our pilot. Hanson's crew was one of the crews that I described. They had 3 members on it that had been wounded or killed. One of them was radio operator, one a co-pilot, and other waist gunner. And so they picked me up on 2 occasions to fly with Hanson's crew when my crew was stood down. I was up to fly the 3rd time with them, not every day now, I don't mean it, but over a period of probably about 3 weeks. On the 3rd occasion, my crew had been stood down because we had been flying the day before. They put my crew back up to fly, so I did not fly with Hanson. They picked up 3 members from a new crew that had just arrived in England, and they happened to be flying just off to my left and in a wing down below us. We were a high flight lead, and I could see this. They got a shell right in the midst of the Bombay, and you could see the smoking like you just absolutely wouldn't believe. And I kept saying under my breath, bail out, bail out, bail out. And of course I was talking to myself, but I was talking to individuals across the way as well, because I could see them just a few yards away over there. Tail gunner folded up and came out the waist place first, and I began to count the crew members, and they came out, and they came out. And actually, the pilot did come out last, but as he did so, the plane peeled off like so and burst into flames. I'm sure no more than, didn't seem like more than 100 feet, but it was probably 100 yards from where the pilot had bailed out. So they were real fortunate, although all of them did, in fact, get out of that aircraft. But I was pretty fortunate that I wasn't up there flying with them that day, too, which I had been scheduled to fly earlier. Although going all the way into Dresden, and that may not mean a great deal to you, was a long, long flight, 13 plus hours that you were in the air. Dresden is all the way in near the Polish border. It was probably, well, in fact, it was as long a target as we'd ever flown, the longest we'd ever flown. It was getting fairly close to toward the end of the war. But Hitler wouldn't give up, so we bummed them out over there. They estimated he killed over 100,000 on that particular day. So yeah, that was a memorable one because it was tiring. I guarantee you, you were worn completely out. The other occasion that was was memorable was February 3rd, 1945. Although I flew to Berlin more than once, this was a Sunday. We hit Berlin, and the air was full of 8th Air Force aircraft just as far as you could see in front and as far as you could see behind you. For an hour at a time, it was nothing but a solid line of planes. And our particular group hit there just at 12 noon, and you could see people coming out of church and otherwise because it was clear as a bell. Although we were up about 28,000 feet, you could look down and see them coming out. And we bombed them. It was Sunday. So, yeah, I remember it very vividly. And although we did not get clobbered with some of the aircraft coming up, I mean, my particular group did not. There were a fair number of planes lost because of that. They always defended Berlin, Leipzig, and a couple of these places fiercely. Going to Berlin or to Dresden wasn't too bad, but when you got shot up pretty bad, and we did get shot up on several occasions. One of those occasions, when I flew with Hansen crew, we had flown 2 missions that were long missions. That is, anywhere from 10 to 11 hours in the air. And I know that doesn't sound like much perhaps to you, but in preparation for that, if you stay on oxygen for 6 or 7 hours, now you believe me, it tires you out considerably. And secondly, to accommodate to 10 or 12 hours of flying, you spent several hours in preparation before you left. You didn't have food to eat up there for that 10 or 12 hours. And secondly, when you got back, you had to unload and clean all your gear, go down to briefing, and do a lot of other things before you ever got to the chow hole. So, you know, all of a sudden you spent 14, 15 hours at the very least. So, yeah, there were occasions when we did that, and it was enough. The third day, we went to briefing, and they said, rather than one of the long missions, which I had just described, we were going, good Lord, Essen, I couldn't think of the name for a minute, which is in the upper Ruhr Valley. And we said, great. It's only about a 6.5 hour flight. Boy, we'd be there and back in a hurry. They briefed us as fairly light gun coverage. Well, unfortunately, Germans had moved barges of guns up that Rhine River in the night since the data had been collected. And when we went in over that target, they estimated 890 guns on us. So you can believe the sky was full of flak. We got our fair share of it. We lost 2 engines before we got out of there. While the flight was lost, I never cheered about another one, I can assure you. So that was one of the tougher ones, and I've lost contact with many. Bob was our pilot, who was from Birmingham, Alabama, as a matter of fact, but he came back and was killed in a hunting accident in 1947, I guess it was, late 46. And he was married, had children. His wife had gotten in touch and so on, so some of the crew attended there. The co-pilot later became a first pilot and in fact completed a tour of 25 years or 30 years in the service. And and I met with him on several occasions. He just died a little more than a year ago. We've gotten together, and as part of our full first bomb group, we've gotten together every 2 years for years. And so I maintained contact with him. One of the individuals whom I was close to went out to, well, after coming out of service, he in fact was a waste gunner, but went out to Denver, Colorado, and worked with Frontier Airlines. Well, he worked with Western initially and then Frontier. I did visit with him on a couple of occasions. Lost contact. I ran into one additional crew member in Ohio some years ago, and those are really the only two crew members I ever maintained that much contact with. The second crew I flew with, I did have contact with a couple of people from there. I came back in July of 1945. I was reassigned then to Air Base down at Moultrie, Georgia, and or just out of Moultrie. And so that's where I was when it ended in Europe. In Japan. It already had ended in Europe at the time we came back from overseas. So I was overseas when it ended in Europe. My father passed away about 2 weeks after I got out of service. So I was at home with my mother for a good long while in Elbert County. Then I went back to college and completed my college education. And then I went to work first the Public Health Department in the state of Georgia, but then the United States Public Health Service. And I moved and worked all over the country. I moved about 14 or 15 times before finally coming to CDC as a Deputy Director of Childhood Diseases Program. That was what I did here for the last 15 years, I guess, or thereabouts. From the old polio days to measles, mumps, rubella, the whole bit. So yeah, and I had 100+ individuals that I recruited and trained all over this country. So I had somebody in every state, in every major city in the country that I supervised. So I'm a member of my old full first bomb group, and I'm on the board. I have been active with that for for years. And of course, we have an 8th Air Force chapter right here in Atlanta, and I'm active in that and have been for a number of years. Most people were like me, I guess, unless you were with someone else who served with you or otherwise, you didn't really say too much about it until years later, really. Although I worked all over, people with whom I worked knew that I had been in the Air Force and so on, but we didn't talk about it. It broadened my outlook about a lot of things. You met different people, you knew about different things than you did growing up in Georgia. Well, different levels of society and otherwise about what goes on elsewhere, which I had no avenue to, I had not been exposed to, if you will, except in a limited way in college. But I mean, that's far different than that kind of an experience. I think it created somewhat more understanding of what went on. As I had described earlier, I had 4 of the brothers who served in the military as well, one of whom made it a career. The remainder of us did not. So having had that kind of exposure, I guess, and because one of my brothers, while I was in England, he was in Italy in the 15th Air Force. I had another brother back in the States in the Air Force. So we had some things in common, if you will. We talked about what went on, where, how. things that were different. They did things in the 15th Air Force because of the circumstances. Now, you're different terrain and otherwise than what you were doing in England, although you had some of the common goals. It certainly was just simply different. But it's one thing for sure. While we had as many as 2,000 aircraft in the air in England during the war, the way aircraft are built now, you would never see that again, forever. 2 or 3 large aircraft now could almost do the kind of thing that several bomb groups could do at that time. So things are certainly different and progress differently. The need and balance of manpower is vastly different. Going to be more technology involved than perhaps with us. But I do try to appreciate the differences. During the time of World War II, it has been depicted as the greatest generation. And I'm proud, of course, to have been a part of that. Whether or not there will ever be a duplicates of this, certainly no one knows.